In the spring of 1940, Europe experienced a shock that redefined warfare. The images were stunning: armored spearheads advancing like unstoppable juggernauts deep into enemy territory, backed by dive bombers. The world had never witnessed anything like it. Western journalists quickly gave this new form of attack a name: Blitzkrieg, lightning war. This term became synonymous with the German war machine and its apparent invincibility. But here is the first major surprise. Blitzkrieg was not an official military doctrine developed by the German General Staff. Rather, it was a combat term coined by the Allies themselves and popularized in the Western media to describe the sheer speed of operations in Poland and later France. General Heinz Guderian himself stated that the term was invented by the enemies due to the swift campaigns. Though unofficial, the term gave German successes a mystical, irresistible appearance. The Allies unintentionally contributed to the psychological warfare by spreading this perception of overwhelming power. The Germans themselves referred to their tactic more soberly as Bewegungskrieg, maneuver warfare, a further development of traditional maneuvering principles combined with Gefecht der verbundenen Waffen, combined arms, the coordinated use of tanks, motorized infantry, artillery, and air support. The concept was not entirely new, but a perfect synthesis of old maneuver principles and new technology, tanks and aircraft. The leadership in Berlin later viewed the term critically. After the rapid success failed to materialize in the Soviet Union in 1941, Hitler personally distanced himself from it. In November 1941, he called the word a very silly word, and in early 1942 dismissed it as Italian phraseology. This disassociation from failure in the East shows that the term Blitzkrieg was internally linked to the expectation of a quick, decisive victory. Once the offensive in the East turned into a war of attrition, the leadership had to repudiate this exaggerated label. When we ask why the Blitzkrieg was so successful in 1940, many people often underestimate the true, unsung key to success. The common misconception is that German tanks were technologically superior to those of the Allies. However, looking at the numbers reveals this is untrue. In May 1940, the Germans deployed 2,582 tanks in total, including many lighter models like the Panzer I and the II. French tanks, such as the Char B1 or the Somme S-35, had significantly better armor, some with 40 to 47 millimeters, and stronger guns than many German tanks. The Allies possessed superior hardware, but the German generals understood the system better. The real game changer lay in the logistics of command transmission, radio communication. In contrast to the French army, which was still rooted in the static thinking of World War I, the Wehrmacht had radios installed in almost every tank, armored vehicle, and even many infantry carriers. This was no accident. It was the result of the doctrine championed by men like Heinz Guderian, who often operated at the front in his own radio command vehicle, Ist KF 241-3. This high density of radio equipment allowed for rapid decision-making and decentralized Führung von vorn, leading from the front. This was essential for the Schwerpunkt, the concentration of forces on the weakest point of the enemy line, which was critical for the breakthrough. The French, however, adhered to an outdated doctrine. 4 out of 5 French tanks did not have a radio. Orders had to be laboriously delivered by courier. On a front that was moving rapidly in May 1940, this slow command transmission cost hours or even days, time that allowed the Germans to bypass and isolate the slower yet stronger French units. France's static mindset made a quick reaction to the deep German penetrations impossible, leading to the disintegration of their command structure. German flexibility and superior coordination easily outweighed the individual combat power of French vehicles. The Blitzkrieg employed 2 more unsung pillars that went far beyond tanks and radios: psychology and engineering. The Junkers Ju-87, better known as the Stuka, was the visual and acoustic symbol of the Blitzkrieg. However, it was not just a precise dive bomber, but a deliberate instrument of psychological warfare, noise devices which acquired the popular name Jericho Trumpets. were attached to the Stuka's landing gear. Although technical authors originally called them sirens, the designation Jericho Trumpets became established due to their function. These generated a terrifying, wailing sound during the dive. The psychological effect was immense. The Blitzkrieg aimed not only at the destruction of physical targets, but at the paralyzing of the enemy. The noise, combined with the precise dive, was intended to cause panic among civilians and soldiers, rendering troops incapable of action. This tactic of generating shock was essential to disintegrate the enemy's command structure through terror before ground troops even arrived. The Blitzkrieg hinges on a single factor, momentum. A rapid advance cannot succeed if it is halted by natural obstacles like rivers, canals, or blown-up bridges. This is where the Pioniereinheiten, combat engineers, came in, the true pathfinders of the army. Engineer units were an integral part of every panzer division and operated literally at the forefront as part of the combined arms combat. Their job was to storm enemy positions, clear booby traps and minefields, and rapidly construct temporary bridges. The Meuse crossing at Sedan in May 1940, which enabled the final breakthrough of the Allied front, would have been inconceivable without this feat of engineering. Pioneers quickly built temporary bridges there so that the heavy armored formations could cross. The engineers' ability to maintain the momentum of the attack by eliminating logistical bottlenecks was the operational lever for tactical success. The Blitzkrieg, or what the Germans internally referred to as Unternehmen Sichelschnitt, Operation Sickle Cut, was not just a military gamble, but a profoundly political and psychological one based on extreme risks. The plan for the Western campaign, Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, envisioned the improbable thrust through the densely forested Ardennes to surprise the Allies. Guderian commanded the 99th Panzer Corps, the spearhead of this advance. He and other panzer commanders, like Erwin Rommel, practiced a radical form of leading from the front. They were often operating miles ahead of their own supply units, in direct contact with the enemy. The psychological impact of this aggression, maintaining the initiative, was a key element. The explosive detail, often overlooked, is this. The success of 1940 was based largely on the insubordination of field commanders. The speed and depth of the penetration caused panic not only among the enemy, but also in their own high command. Conservative generals feared the exposed flanks of the armored wedges and repeatedly demanded a halt to allow the infantry to catch up and secure supplies. On May 16 and 17, 1940, Guderian and Rommel ignored these explicit halt orders from their superiors, including General Kleist, and continued their rapid advance west, an act of open disobedience. Rommel advanced so fast that he was temporarily out of radio range of the High Command. Guderian was so embroiled in conflict with Kleist that he momentarily offered his resignation, only to be personally reinstated by Hitler. The success of the 1940 Blitzkrieg was thus founded on breaking their own rules. The doctrine was so radical that its operational execution often had to be forced against the will of the cautious High Command. The most famous halt order occurred near Dunkirk on May 24, 1940. Hitler himself stopped the left wing of the army at the Aya River and forbade them from crossing. This order, which allowed the British and French troops to escape, is intensely debated historically. Historians argue whether this order was based on Hitler's fear of Allied flank attacks, the desire to conserve the tanks for the next phase, swampy terrain, or simply the conservative leadership, OKW, being overwhelmed and unable to keep pace with Guderian's force speed. Regardless of the motive, the Dunkirk halt order marked the point where the strategic momentum of the radical armored thrust was stopped by the political and highest military leadership. The successes of 1939 and 1940 created the illusion of invincibility, but Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, exposed the inherent limitations of the Blitzkrieg. Initially, the strategy seemed to work. The armored wedges drove deep. The focus was on the Vernichtungsschlacht, Battle of Annihilation, and the encirclement of the enemy in cauldrons, Kesselschlacht. In 1941 alone, huge encirclements like Kiev resulted in the capture of nearly 3.5 million Soviet soldiers. Tactically, this was a massive success. Strategically, however, it concealed failure. The cauldron battles prolonged the operations and delayed the advance on strategic objectives like Moscow. The Blitzkrieg was designed for a quick victory that would destroy the enemy's logistics, but the vastness of the Soviet Union far exceeded the material capabilities of the Wehrmacht. The biggest unsung obstacle was logistics. The fast mechanized units required enormous amounts of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. In 1940, the Germans were already short of trucks. With the invasion of the Soviet Union, this problem drastically worsened. Up until 1945, the army continued to rely heavily on horse-drawn vehicles. When the famous Rasputitsa, the mud season, began in the autumn, the rapid motorized army reverted to a horse-drawn force, negating the entire logic of speed. The fighting dragged into the winter, leading to the Soviet Winter Offensive, which marked the failure of Operation Barbarossa and a turning point in World War II. The Soviet Union did not defeat the Blitzkrieg with static defense, but by developing a superior movement strategy, the Soviet deep operation. This doctrine was essentially a more robust, resource-intensive form of maneuver warfare. It relied on the concentration of massive forces and utilized echeloned waves of attack and deep penetration of the enemy. The Soviets knew they would always outnumber their enemy and possess more resources to sustain the attack, even if the first wave was stopped. This concept was perfected in Operation Bagration in 1944. Through the consistent application of combined arms in a coordinated strategic assault, the Red Army shattered the German Army Group Center and executed a 600-kilometer deep operation in just 6 weeks. They trumped the German Blitzkrieg through scale and logistics. The Blitzkrieg, a term coined by the enemy, was a masterpiece of operational warfare. Its initial success was the sum of crucial, often overlooked factors, including the revolution in communication via radios in every vehicle, the vital work of the pioneers, engineers, at the spearhead, and the radicalism and risk-taking of commanders like Guderian and Rommel. But it was fragile. Its failure in the vastness of Russia teaches us that even the most brilliant tactic can shatter against the mundane realities of fuel shortages, the mud of the Rasputitsa, and the adaptability of a resource-rich opponent. The war of speed ended there, where speed inevitably stopped. Thank you for watching. If you found these untold secrets of the Blitzkrieg compelling, don't miss our next deep dive into military history. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single video. See you next time.